There is a symbol older than language, older than myth, older than the first story a human ever told beside fire. A serpent, curling into a perfect circle, tail in its mouth, devouring itself. The Ouroboros. Most who see it think it represents death, or endings, or destruction. But the ones who carved it into temple walls and inscribed it into alchemical manuscripts understood something far greater. This is the symbol of eternity, the symbol of a universe that recreates itself endlessly, the symbol of consciousness learning itself by becoming itself again and again. The Ouroboros is not just an image, it is a map of how everything in existence moves, breathes, dies, returns, and is born again. The ancient Egyptians believed that the serpent encircling itself was the boundary of the known universe, the edge where matter dissolves into the infinite. In Greece, philosophers said that the Ouroboros represented the soul, forever transforming, never ending. In Hinduism, it became the endless cycle of samsara, birth, death, and rebirth. In alchemy, it was the key to the magnum opus, the great work, the transformation of the base self into the immortal self. But the meaning is deeper still. The Ouroboros is the moment you realize that the end of one version of you is the beginning of another, that every identity you have ever worn, child, lover, warrior, student, seeker, believer, skeptic, was temporary, shed like skin. And now another is forming. The serpent is not destroying itself, it is renewing itself, and so are you. Every time you let go of who you thought you were, every time you step into a new version of yourself, every time an old belief falls away and something clearer rises, you are living the Ouroboros. This symbol is not a relic of the past. It is alive inside everyone who has ever felt the pull of transformation. And that is why the Ouroboros returns in every civilization, every era, every awakening. Because the truth it carries cannot be forgotten. It can only be remembered. And once remembered, you begin to see it everywhere. In the seasons, in the breath, in relationships that end and rebloom, in dreams that die only to return in new form. The Ouroboros is the memory that nothing is lost, nothing is wasted, nothing is final. Everything is becoming itself again. And now you are about to see what it has been trying to show you all along. You have seen the Ouroboros far more times than you realized, though often it was hiding in plain sight. It appears in mythological art carved into stone long before the first alphabet was formed. It winds around the borders of medieval manuscripts drawn by monks who believed knowledge had no beginning and no end. It coils at the edges of ancient alchemical diagrams, guarding the sacred process of transformation, like a sentry who allows only the prepared to pass. You have seen it in the cyclical pattern of seasons, in the returning phases of the moon, in the breath that enters and leaves your lung in one continuous loop. You have lived the Ouroboros every time you shed a version of yourself and stepped into another. And yet most people never stop to consider what this symbol is trying to say. They think of life as a straight line, past behind, future ahead, identity fixed somewhere between the two. But the Ouroboros tells a different story. Life does not move in a line. It moves in a circle. Everything you have ever experienced has returned to you in different forms, different faces, different lessons. The same emotional patterns, the same fears, the same desires, the same longings have appeared again and again in your life, not because you failed to escape them, but because you are meant to transform through them. The Ouroboros appears wherever transformation is the purpose. In Egypt, it circled the sun god Ra as he traveled through night and day, death and rebirth. The Egyptians believed that existence was a continuous process of dying to what was and awakening to what could be. The serpent was not a symbol of danger. It was a symbol of eternity. In Norse myth, Jormungandr, the world serpent, encircles the earth, holding reality together, not destroying it, holding it, containing the infinite within a boundary of sacred return. In Hindu philosophy, time is not linear but cyclical. Universes expand and collapse. Souls incarnate and dissolve, only to incarnate again. Even the gods are part of this cycle, because nothing in existence stands still. Everything grows. Everything transforms. Everything becomes itself again. In Greek alchemy, The Ouroboros appears with text that reads, "The One is all, the All is One." This is not poetic mysticism, it is a description of consciousness. There is no separation between the you who was, the you who is, and the you who will be. They are the same being, unfolding through different stages of awareness. The Ouroboros is that awareness. And when it appears in your life, in your thoughts, your dreams, your symbols, your intuitions, it is because you are entering a phase of return. Not return to the past, return to yourself. The self beneath identity, the self beneath habit, the self beneath the stories you were told about who you are allowed to be. When you begin to sense that your life has been guiding you all along, that the same lessons keep returning because they are invitations, not punishments. This is the Ouroboros awakening in your mind. It is the moment you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this trying to transform in me?" Because the serpent is not consuming itself out of destruction, it is consuming itself out of renewal. It is refining its own being. It is transmuting the old into the new. And that is the hidden message of the Ouroboros. You are allowed to become new, not by escaping your past, but by integrating it, not by rejecting who you have been, but by absorbing the lessons of every version of yourself and carrying them forward as wisdom. Nothing in your life has been wasted. Every ending was a beginning wearing a different mask. Every loss was a clearing. Every collapse was a doorway. The serpent does not die when it sheds its skin. It becomes more itself. And so do you. Before the Ouroboros became a symbol whispered about in esoteric circles, it was carved into the oldest mythic frameworks humanity ever constructed. In ancient Egypt, it appeared in the tomb of Tutankhamun, encircling the sun god as he traveled through the underworld. The Egyptians believed that the sun did not simply rise and set. It died each night and was reborn each morning. The serpent surrounding the sun represented the boundary between death and rebirth, the threshold through which all life must pass. The Ouroboros was the guardian of renewal. The Egyptians understood that nothing truly ends. It changes form. The Nile floods and recedes. The body decays and feeds new life. Dynasties fall and rise again in new lineages. Existence is not linear but rhythmic, and the serpent was the keeper of that rhythm. In the Greek world, the Ouroboros emerged within Orphic and Pythagorean mystery schools, where reality was viewed as a living, breathing organism. To the Orphics, the universe was born from a cosmic egg encircled by a serpent. The serpent was time itself, endless, self-sustaining, and devouring every form it produced. The Greeks saw the Ouroboros not only as a symbol of eternity, but as a symbol of self-knowledge. They believed that the soul, too, is circular. It descends into matter, forgets itself, wanders through experience, learns through suffering and joy, and eventually remembers. Memory was not recollection. Memory was awakening. In the Gnostic texts of the early Christian world, the Ouroboros appears again, but now with an even sharper psychological meaning. The Gnostics believed the human being contained a divine spark trapped within a material shell. The Ouroboros represented the boundary of ignorance, the closed loop of perception that keeps the soul asleep in the illusion of separation. But when the soul begins to wake, when it begins to question the narrative of identity, the serpent becomes something else entirely. It becomes the key to breaking the closed circle and realizing that the divine was never outside you. It was the awareness watching your life unfold the entire time. This interpretation became central to Hermetic philosophy, where the Ouroboros took on its most refined and transformative meaning. In alchemy, the Ouroboros is the first and final stage of the great work, the transmutation of the self. The alchemists were not trying to turn lead into gold. That was a metaphor, a veil designed to protect the teachings from those who were unprepared. The real alchemy was the transformation of the human being from unconscious suffering to conscious participation in the unfolding of reality. Lead was the unrefined self, reactive, fearful, conditioned, fragmented. Gold was the awakened self, unified, clear, grounded in awareness rather than identity. The Ouroboros is the process by which the lead becomes gold. It is the stage where the self consumes itself, not in destruction, in integration. Every belief, every identity, every wound, every triumph, every loss, every mask you have ever worn is taken into the self and absorbed as understanding. The parts of you that were once painful become sources of wisdom. The parts of you that were once confused become clarity. Nothing is thrown away, nothing is rejected, nothing is denied. Everything becomes fuel for transformation. This is why in alchemical manuscripts, the Ouroboros is drawn with the phrase hen to pan, the one is all and all is one. It is not philosophical poetry. It is a statement about consciousness. Your life is not a collection of disconnected events. It is one process, one transformation, one unfolding. Every version of you has led to this moment. Every moment has been part of the circle. And when the alchemist sees this, truly sees it, the great work begins to accelerate. Because the greatest barrier to transformation is not the past. It is the belief that the past should not have happened. The Ouroboros dissolves that belief. It teaches that what you have lived has shaped you into the exact being capable of awakening now. If even one moment were different, the circle would not be complete. The serpent would not meet its own tail. And the being you are now, the being who is ready to awaken, would not exist. The Ouroboros does not ask you to erase who you have been. It asks you to recognize that who you have been was necessary. The darkness was not a mistake. The confusion was not failure. The loss was not punishment. Every step brought you closer to remembering the one that has been breathing in your chest since the beginning. That is why the Ouroboros appears in every culture that has ever sought to understand reality. Because reality is not a story of victory or defeat, success or failure, rising or falling. Reality is a story of return to self, return to awareness, return to wholeness, and every soul, whether it knows it or not, is already inside that return. To understand the Ouroboros on the level it was originally meant to be understood, you have to look inward, because the Ouroboros is not primarily a symbol of the universe. It is a symbol of the human being. More specifically, it is a symbol of the process through which a person becomes whole. In modern psychology, particularly in the work of Carl Jung, the human psyche is not a singular entity. It is a constellation, a layering of selves. There is the self you show to the world, the persona, the mask shaped by culture, memory, identity, approval, and expectation. There is the self you hide, the shadow, the parts of you you have rejected, feared, suppressed, or forgotten. There is the self that watches, the witness consciousness, silent, unchanging, present in you the way a flame is present inside fire. And there is the deeper self, the eternal identity, the organizing intelligence that has been with you since your first memory, before your first name, before any role you were taught to play. Most people live only in the mask. They construct a life around who they think they are supposed to be, holding themselves together with routine, belief, and repetition. But the psyche cannot stay frozen. The mask eventually cracks, and when it does, something begins to awaken. The Ouroboros is that awakening. It is the moment when the self begins to turn inward and face itself, not to destroy, but to integrate. The serpent eating its own tail is the psyche consuming the identities that no longer serve it. Every outdated version of yourself becomes nourishment for the one that is emerging. This is why transformation often feels like death. It is death. But not of you, only of the version of you that could not see its own depth. Jung called this process individuation, the unification of the conscious and unconscious parts of the self into a whole. The Ouroboros is the symbol of individuation because it shows the psyche turning back toward itself, recognizing its own patterns, integrating what was once hidden, and remembering its inner source. When people resist this process, life becomes suffering, because resisting transformation is resisting the natural movement of reality. The serpent must shed its skin, or it suffocates. You must shed your old self, or you stagnate. This shedding often appears through emotional cycles, repeated experiences, recurring relationships, patterns that reappear not to punish you but to reveal you. The universe is not forcing repetition on you. It is offering return. Return to the place where the self was split. Return to the wound. Return to the forgotten moment where you decided you had to become small. The Ouroboros brings you back there, not to re-traumatize you, but to liberate you. Because the only way to become whole is to reclaim the part of yourself you abandoned. The downward turn of the serpent is descent, into memory, into grief, into shadow, into the parts of yourself you once feared to look at. The upward turn is ascent, into clarity, into compassion, into awareness, into the realization that every part of you has always been trying to protect you. The Ouroboros teaches that nothing within you is your enemy. Even the patterns that have caused you pain were attempts to survive. When you see that, the war inside ends. And when the war ends, a new kind of strength emerges. Not the strength of the mask, not the strength of pretending, but the strength of knowing who you are without needing to justify it. This is rebirth, not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden enlightenment, but a quiet, steady realization. I have always been whole. I only forgot. The Ouroboros shows you that awakening is not becoming something new. It is remembering something ancient. Remembering that you are not a separate self navigating a hostile world. You are consciousness experiencing itself through form. You are awareness dressed in flesh. You are the eternal playing at being temporary. And when you remember this, life changes. Not because the world changes, but because the place you are perceiving from changes. You begin to see patterns where there was once chaos, meaning where there was once confusion, guidance where there was once randomness. The Ouroboros is the map of how the eternal self moves through the temporary world, forgetting, remembering, shedding, awakening, returning, over and over, not as a trap, but as a spiral, a circle that moves upward. The serpent does not return to the same point. It returns to itself on a higher level of awareness each time. That is the real meaning of eternal return. Not repetition, evolution. Today the Ouroboros is returning, not carved into ancient stone or painted in alchemical manuscripts, but resurfacing in the human psyche. You can see it in the increasing number of people who feel that the life they were taught to pursue no longer makes sense. You can feel it in the collective exhaustion with identities that are too small, too rigid, too controlled. You can sense it in the quiet intuition that the old way of living is collapsing, not because the world is ending, but because consciousness is changing. The Ouroboros returns whenever humanity is on the edge of transformation. We live in an age obsessed with progress, innovation, productivity, economy, growth. Everything is forward-moving, linear, fast. But the psyche does not evolve in a straight line. It evolves in cycles. It rises and descends, expands and contracts, remembers and forgets, dies and returns. And right now, millions of people are entering the descent phase, the inward turning, the questioning, the dissolving of old identities. Careers that once felt meaningful now feel hollow. Relationships that once felt defining now feel like echoes. Beliefs that once felt stable now feel too small to hold the fullness of who you are becoming. This is not collapse. It is shedding. The Ouroboros is the symbol of the moment when the self recognizes that it can no longer remain who it has been. And this recognition does not come from external ambition. It comes from the inside, from a knowing that does not speak in words, but in silence. A knowing that says, it is time. Time to remember. Time to return. Time to transform. And this is why the Ouroboros is resurfacing in psychology, spirituality, philosophy, art, and personal discourse. People are awakening to the realization that the self cannot be completed through external achievement, that no amount of success, validation, status, or control can satisfy the longing to meet oneself. The Ouroboros is not about becoming more. It is about becoming real. And becoming real requires returning to the parts of yourself you abandoned to survive, the part of you that once knew how to feel deeply, the part of you that once trusted your intuition, the part of you that once believed life was meaningful before the world convinced you to harden. When someone begins to reclaim these parts, they feel like they are unraveling, but they are not unraveling. They are remembering, they are returning. And once they return, something extraordinary begins to happen. The very patterns that once caused suffering begin to make sense. The narrative of life begins to reveal itself, The past no longer feels like weight, it feels like foundation. The future no longer feels like something to chase. It feels like something unfolding through you. The Ouroboros returns in times like these because humanity is being asked to remember what it has forgotten, that growth is not linear, that healing is not escape, that identity is not fixed, that the self transforms through cycles of expansion and contraction, individually and collectively. And you are living through one of those cycles now. If you have felt lost, it is because you are shedding. If you have felt like the life you once recognized is dissolving, it is because you are returning to a deeper truth. If you have felt like the world is ending, it is because the version of you that belonged to the old world is ending. The Ouroboros does not ask you to fear this, it asks you to trust it, because everything you are becoming is already inside you, waiting, remembering, returning. The circle is closing, but not to trap you, to complete you. Now you understand why the serpent has always returned, why it circles the edges of myth, religion, art, psychology, and memory, why it appears in dreams, in intuition, in the quiet moments where your old self begins to fall away. The Ouroboros is not a symbol of destruction. It is a symbol of return, the return to your origin, the return to your essence, the return to the part of you that has never been wounded, never been broken, never been lost. The part of you that has been watching your entire life unfold from within. Every ending you have experienced, every loss, every collapse, every moment when you thought you could not continue, was the beginning of another version of you. The Ouroboros has been guiding you without your awareness. It has been teaching you that nothing is wasted, that nothing is final, that every version of you has been necessary to bring you to this moment. And now you stand at the threshold that the ancient alchemists spoke of. The moment when the self becomes aware of itself, when the watcher and the lived experience meet, when the serpent recognizes its own form. The only remaining question is whether you will step through, whether you will allow yourself to become who you were always meant to be, whether you will trust the process of shedding and renewal, because the circle is not a prison, it is a doorway. And once you see this symbol clearly, once you feel its truth in your own life, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to living as if you are separate from your own becoming. The Ouroboros has returned to remind you that your life is not random. It is a work of art unfolding from the inside. And this is just the beginning. Because there is another symbol, older than history, older than memory, older than the concept of time. A pattern that appears in the growth of flowers, in the spirals of galaxies, in the formation of cells, in the architecture of every living being. A symbol that does not just describe transformation, it describes creation itself. If the Ouroboros shows you the cycle of becoming, this symbol shows you the structure of existence.